Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the Black Tower Show. We're back. I'm Nathan Ford, Jake Fox in BC Studios, broadcasting 1310 WRSB, 1590 WASB, Brockport, Canandaigua, Rochester, upstate New York. And we just had a monster snowstorm. People digging out their cars out there. Shoveling. Good exercise shoveling. It's good. It's very zen. You get your shovel out there. I don't need that. I don't need a snowblower, Jake. I don't need that.
The shoveling kind of brings me, it sharpens me to an angry edge.
Yeah, it sharpens you. Right, it's work. It's hard work. You got to work. You got to keep your mind right, and you got to work your body. And people, you're listening out there. You got to listen to this interview here. Or let's say it's a discussion. Not an interview. I don't like interview. It sounds too proddy. Like I got, I don't know. Let's have a little round table discussion. Dr. Paul Laviolette on the Black Tower Show. Man, oh man. What an honor to have Paul Laviolette, Dr. Paul Laviolette on the Black Tower Show. Author of Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion, Subquantum Kinetics, Earth Under Fire, Genesis of the Cosmos. Published so many original papers: physics, astronomy, climatology, systems theory, and psychology. Before we had you on, I just doing some of the research here. I find it fascinating.
Hi, Nathan.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Glad to be here.
But I gotta say, BA in physics, Johns Hopkins, MBA, University of Chicago, PhD from Portland State University. We're going to talk a little bit about Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion. And let's get started. When we're in school, we're learning about the theory of relativity. It says it's impossible to control gravity. But could this be wrong? Could the things that we learned in school be wrong? Wait a minute. I thought they were always right. No. Let's break this down. Let's start at the beginning here. Is it possible to defy gravity? Dr. Paul Laviolette on the Black Tower Show.
Well, definitely you can control gravity. You can also shield it. If you know the right way to do it. You want me to give some examples of how this would be?
Absolutely, yes.
Well, for shielding, like if you are able to rotate a massive object, it tends to have a shielding effect. If you're able to get what that does is it creates, to understand it, you'd have to admit the existence of an ether. And the idea that the gravity field in our Earth is due to, gravity being what I refer to as geons. They're actually etheric particles being consumed in the Earth, and it creates a gradient. So it's as if they're being consumed, and there's more of them further out in space, so it's like this slope towards the Earth. And that's something you can't, that's always going to be there. But you could shield that if you were able to sort of spin those geons outward laterally before they get coming through your vehicle, your airship. And so that's one technique. The other is a technology called electrogravitics. This is something Einstein could never find a way to unify his gravitational theory with Maxwell's equations and electrostatics. But in fact, there is a connection between the two. Townsend Brown, as an American inventor, who began work in this when he was 10 years old. He's a genius. He discovered that there is a link between electrostatics and gravitation. So like if you had a capacitor, where you charge up the plates, he was charging them to like 50 to 100,000, even 200,000 volts. He found if he had lead in between the plates, to create a mass between them. He found the Colt capacitor would move. It's as if he was generating a gravitational field connected with the electric field. So there's this field of research has come to be called electrogravitics, and there's a whole range of technologies for using this effect to control gravity.
So essentially, like, to have a really highly charged, so what exactly is being highly charged? Is it a mass? Is it something that you can hold that's being highly charged? And you're creating this actual kind of your own gravitational field, correctly? That is kind of separate from our own gravitational field here.
Right. Yeah. Well, a capacitor, it's like a battery would store electricity. A capacitor can do it without any electrolyte. It's just, all it is two metal plates and an insulator in between.
Sure.
So like when you go across the floor in the wintertime and you pick up static electricity and then you get a spark when you touch the doorknob, your body is acting like a capacitor. It's picking up electrical charges. So there are very sophisticated capacitors that can store huge amounts of charge. They have in between the plates, if you put something called barium titanate, that's able to store like 10,000 times more charge than if you had air between the plates. And Brown was using those types of materials for his later work. Initially, he was using stuff that wasn't quite sophisticated. But he created like this pendulum. He would hang. This was when he was in high school.
That's amazing.
You can imagine, like other kids might have been, I don't know, making firecrackers and rockets. He was
playing Pac-Man and chewing bubble gum.
He was, dealing with the next level of propulsion science at that age. He hung this pendulum, which he would charge up to like 200,000 volts. It was like plus on one side and minus on the other, and he had lead in between. And the whole thing would move off to the side towards the positive electrode, indicating that positive charge creates like a gravity well, and a negative charge creates like a gravity hill. So you get this gravitational gradient. So it's as if, to this pendulum, it's as if he's created a huge mass just beyond its positive electrode. It's kind of trying to pull it, but this is all artificially generated. So he was using this principle in some of his, he had some devices that would actually lift off vertically in a laboratory. Lift them their own weight plus 10% additional weight. And he also had some flying discs where, with his flying discs, they were making use of another phenomenon besides electrogravitic. There's another phenomenon that just uses electric fields. And that's why a lot of people, they refer to this whole technology generally as field propulsion. Actually, in the military, if you can find somebody that will talk about it, they will sometimes use that word as opposed to rocket propulsion or jet propulsion.
Go a little bit into field propulsion and how that works.
Okay, well, you have the two kinds. You have electrogravitic, which I just talked about, where you charge things to huge voltage. But again, the other version where you again charge to, let's say, charge up your vehicle, like the B-2 bomber, for example, which I reverse engineered. I believe it uses this technology. B-2 bomber charges the leading edge of its wing to, let's say, positive 15 million volts, and dumps the negative charges out the back. So it creates this huge gravitational field, or electric field, from front to back. But the front of the wing is much bigger than the back part. Like the negative ions are very concentrated at the back. So it's what you call an asymmetrical capacitor. It means one plate is bigger than the other. And when you analyze all the forces between, there are these forces between the ions that are leaving the craft, and they create forces back on the craft. And you analyze these, and they don't balance, and they end up creating a very strong force pushing forward. So actually, with something like the B-2 bomber, these kinds of unbalanced electric forces play a bigger role even than the electrogravitic, I believe. Let's say electrovitics is maybe 10 or 15% of the total in that case.
You have to excuse my my naivete here. But how exactly does an electronic field, in the case of the B-2 bomber, how does that create a liftoff or create sort of an anti-gravity effect? How does the electricity make that happen?
In the B-2 bomber, it uses regular jet engines made by GE to get off the ground. But once it's in the air, then they can flip a switch that turns on their electrostatic field. The engines have generators. They generate a small amount of electricity, let's say up to 50,000 volts. And if you notice on the B-2, the engines aren't out in the open. They're sort of all hidden inside, and they've got these big air scoops in the front. So these are what Townsend Brown was calling. Actually, you see, Townsend Brown invented basically all the technology that went into the B-2, I believe. He developed what's called a flame jet generator, which is if you have like a regular jet engine and you put like static electricity, like let's say 50,000 volts, like you would get from your air cleaner, in the airstream, you can end up generating millions of volts, just like a Van de Graaff generator, where in this case the belt is the air itself. You've all seen Van de Graaff generator at these science fairs, generating millions of volts. You put your hand on it and your hair stands up. So this kind of idea. So once you're in the air, you turn that on, and it's generating electricity from the air. It's scooping up, basically. And at a certain point, you can actually shut off the fuel. So you're gliding now and scooping air and generating this electricity, which you then use to propel the craft. So that's why it's such a neat idea, why the military got so excited about it, and they didn't want to tell anybody. It became highly classified. It's
fascinating. I mean, do you think that the military has this technology, just keeping it hidden? You wonder what if we had this technology, we used it for commercial air travel. That would be. We're talking about clean energy.
I mean, what else are they using this stuff for? I mean, do you think they're using this technology in some sort of secret space program / travel, whatever? For
sure. In fact, a fellow named Gary McKinnon, who was sort of entering into through the internet into U.S. government sites, sort of like Snowden, but this guy was a computer hacker. He found some very interesting information on the U.S. Space Command site about names of ships, which were not Navy ships. If you looked up Navy names, none of these were registered Navy ships on Earth. And they were talking about ship-to-ship transfers and extraterrestrial crew members, meaning off Earth. And so you got the impression from this that we have not one but many vessels out there which have crews on. They're big enough to have crews. I mean, nothing like the space shuttle. We're talking about probably much bigger crews. And that they fly around. It's all secret. They probably, there's been talk, we have bases on other planets, so they're probably even mining raw materials out there. They have probably secret bases on Earth where they land. And Richard Dolan. I don't know if you've had him on your show.
No, but he's a local guy.
Too far from you there.
Yeah, he's
and he's written some books about this. He used the word off-planet society or civilization seems to have developed. It's like as if there seems to be a total economy. This is what you infer from this, based on McKinnon's hacking, and just use your logic. Look, we developed some of these vehicles to get into space with virtually very small amounts of energy. You can get off the Earth into space. So very inexpensively, actually. And if you had this for decades and decades, eventually you're going to set up bases, and you can actually develop an economy if you have enough people out there.
With this electrokinetic, like the technology and this energy, I mean, we're taught that it would take, X amount of time to get to Mars. But what are we talking about? Using this technology, how long would it take to get to Mars?
Well, I gave as an example. Yeah, now they can probably, with what they got, do it much faster than. I was trying to be conservative. I say, suppose give me $10 million or $50 million, which is a lot less than what they're talking about for Mars. They're talking about $20 billion for the rocket to go to Mars. That's what NASA was talking about. So I estimated you could do the trip in 5 days.
5 days.
Yeah,
that's fast.
And you would run it not on rockets. Your energy would come from the sun. You'd have photovoltaic cells. That's how little energy this consumes. So you have an array of photovoltaics on your craft, and that's enough energy to get you to Mars. Think about it.
I have two questions regarding this kind of secret space program. Is this a American-centric space program, or is this, some sort of conglomerate with other countries? And how exactly are they funding this? And, how are they getting this, past budgets and things like that?
Yeah, it's not just the U.S. I believe, definitely England is involved, and possible Australia and France. There was a paper, newsletter put out weekly or biweekly by a aerospace intelligence firm back in the 50s called Aviation Studies. They're based in England. And they were pushing Townsend Brown's ideas about electrogravitics, stuff that, all the published magazine articles about electrogravitics, if you look at the literature, you do find mention of this, and that research was going on in the aerospace industry. But then after 1959, there was a media ban on talking about this technology at all. Somebody gave the message, you're not to publish anything about this. So that's when it went underground. But if you go back far enough, you find these articles. In my book, Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion, I've sort of unearthed all this evidence that shows the reality of this. So it's not just speculation. This is a real thing that was happening, and it's just been blocked from the media communication. So whole generations have gone by without any idea that this exists. But in that report, in the Aviation Studies report, they put out one called Electrogravitic Systems, where they're talking about this whole new technology that's going to completely revolutionize air travel. In fact, they were idealistic, thinking that this would be developed commercially, and ended up getting classified. But they were referring to work going on in England in addition to the U.S., also in France and a few other countries. but it was mainly something that was born in USA. That's where the main development and the inventions were developed.
You're starting to see the airline; those are becoming, they're kind of becoming a monopoly in a sense. You wonder if that trend has something to do with keeping this technology in the future and keeping it in the dark. I wonder if you see that trend.
Well, it's very much in the dark. I mean, you see what he's describing as a situation where they're mining other planets or creating a whole another economy. I mean, essentially what Dr. Paul Laviolette is talking about is a breakaway civilization separate from ours. And I'm curious as to, how they keep fueling this with money. But I mean, and then you go back and you look at, YouTube videos of Donald Rumsfeld testifying in front of Congress the day before 9/11 that $2 trillion is missing from the Pentagon budget, and he has no idea where it went and couldn't come up with any sort of logical explanation for it. And it makes you think, is that $2 trillion being funneled into this breakaway civilization? Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, it could be. Into black projects. Some of it might be on the Earth, and other, out there. They need to finance it somehow. I don't know if these guys are given Earth leave, or like in Star Trek.
Well, you wonder if they know about things like a giant solar flare that happens. I mean, you talk about it as being this thing that occurs cyclically over the course of human history. And maybe that knowledge is out there. You say that there's a real high probability that within the next 400 years, I think you said 90% chance, that we're going to be witnessing one of these events that's going to exterminate a lot of human beings. So this push towards, putting bases possibly on the moon and on Mars seems, that maybe the elites are keen to some of this information.
Well, I think if people are properly protected, they wouldn't be exterminated. I mean, we went through the last ice age. That was pretty serious stuff that happened back then, as far as what I call galactic superwave coming from the galactic core. It's a volley of cosmic rays. If you were in a cave for a very strong one, you could survive. It would probably, actually, solar flares, very killer type solar flares, are more worrisome than the superwave itself. And there appears to have been a major extinction level solar flare at the end of the ice age, which produced a Pleistocene mass extinction, where 95% of the large animals on this continent died off at that time. But a lot of these are not as strong as that. There have been something like about a dozen that have happened in the last 6,000 years, which were much briefer events and lower intensity. But even that, like it might not be biologically harmful, but it could disrupt society, like burn out the grid transformers, and knock out satellites. So we would go back to the horse and buggy days overnight if something like that happened.
Go a little bit more into super waves. What exactly is happening there? So could you kind of clarify that for our listeners?
Well, actually, there is a possibility something could happen this April, May. I've been following this, issued some postings on the etheric.com site. That's ETHERIC.com. It's a website I participate in. And we're watching the situation where it's a cloud, they say 3 Earth masses, cloud heading towards the galactic center. And I believe that the cloud, to be that compact, had to have a star inside. It's so dense they can't see. And other astronomers agree with that and have been proposing various ideas of what kind of star might be inside. And the fear is, this is going to come closest to the galactic center in April of this coming year. And if the cloud contains not one star but two stars, or a star and a large planet, like a Jupiter-sized planet, it's a very strong probability that the gravitational field of the core, which is 4 million times greater than our sun's field, could rip off one of these bodies and gobble it all at once. You see, if it was just a gas cloud and the gas sort of spiraled in gradually, that wouldn't be so bad. But if it's going to be a whole planet, it sort of could trigger, the amount of energy is enormous that would be released, and it could trigger the galactic core to go into its active state, which we observe in other galaxies that every so often, every, let's say, 10,000 years or so, the core ignites and sends out a volley of cosmic rays. I call these superwaves. So scientists are convinced that this happens in other galaxies, and they believe it happens in our own. But earlier, when I first proposed this, I did my PhD work on proposing this phenomenon, the superwave phenomenon. At that time, when I proposed it, they thought that these events happened very infrequently, like every 150,000 years.
Sure.
150 million years, excuse me. And I was saying, no, it can happen every 12,000 years. And then later I found even more frequent. You get these small events happening more frequently. And now they finally came around to agree with what I was saying. Of course, they never cite my work, but they're saying what I said 30 years ago. The only thing is they don't have the full picture yet. They're still thinking that what happens out there is not going to reach us, that it's going to be just cosmic rays are going to become magnetically trapped. But with a superwave theory, what it proposes, and it's supported by a lot of evidence, is that these cosmic rays come directly to us at the speed of light. So when you see the explosion going on out there, the cosmic rays are already here, so you don't have any warning, see. Just like in the Bible, it says the day of the Lord shall come like a thief in the night. Be prepared.
Be prepared. So what does it look like here on Earth? What does it mean for the people living here and the animals living here? What should I do?
We don't, it's a big question mark. It depends how big an event will be the next one. Sure. We can't predict it. We can watch carefully, like the astronomers are watching carefully this cloud as it rounds the corner. And I think the greatest chance is when it's just rounding from the closest approach, coming back out. And if we see the cloud split into two, we know we're in for some big event, because that splitting will indicate something is being pulled away, and it probably will fall in. And then we'll have probably 1 month to prepare from that point. So I formed about over 20 years ago, I formed an organization called the Starburst Foundation, which one of its main objectives is to start alerting the world if there's an impending hazard. So we would go into red alert stage at that point. And one way you can find out is either through the etheric.com site or through starburstfound.org, which is the Starburst site. But you probably won't hear about it through the media.
Well, yeah.
Unfortunately. We're trying to, alert people in the government, and we did do a outreach project in '89 to alert everyone, all the representatives, the President, White House, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, et cetera, all the UN reps. So at that time they knew about it. We should probably do a refresher, but it's just a matter of I don't have any staff, to do this.
I wanted to get your thoughts on Dr. Courtney Brown, who he just wrapped up his climate project. When you're talking about superwaves, you're talking about this technology, you're talking about, and we are kind of trying to, like you said, it is a question mark. But what do you think about the work that he's doing, and that the climate changing is going to have a huge impact on the people here? And how does that work into the things that you're saying.
Is this a recent remote viewing that he's done?
Correct, yeah. He had a climate project that spanned a couple years. He just finished it, and what he was finding is that, the meteors and flooding and some of the things that you're seeing around the world, that he was actually kind of, his remote viewers were able to see those things.
There'll be an acceleration of these things. Yeah.
An acceleration that we're hitting, that it is kind of speeding up in a way, or becoming more frequent. Yeah.
Well, the remote viewing that he did a little earlier, there might be a different one, but it's related, where they did this back in 2008, and they compared June of 2000, or May or June of 2008 with May or June of 2013, and they found, or 2012, I think it was, and they found some of them were seeing meteor-like objects hitting the Earth, and people running and being exacerbated, and maybe tidal waves and so on. So people were afraid maybe this was indicating some big hazard. And I have analyzed this on one of our sites. It was either Starburst or Etheric.com. I think we have a forum on the Starburst site dealing with superwaves. I think it was there, pointing out that maybe they were actually tuning into this Russian event where this meteor came across and broke a lot of windows, and people were feeling the shock from it, and it shook up a lot of people. And they actually, I show some of the pictures and actual pictures that were taken, and you see this amazing correspondence. And here were people, they were just looking into the future, and they were able to visualize these things. But even the crater looked very much like what the guy drew.
And you wonder if this has something to do with, mass extinction, if we're heading into that.
Well, a superwave could have a gravity component to it, right at the leading edge, which could actually arrive a few days before the actual visible effects. So, maybe the first effects would be seismic events around the Earth. Other effects would be the sort of like an EMP effect, which could overload the power lines with high voltages and burn out transformers. Radiation effects, depends how intense it would be. You could have if it was a very strong one, could have fairly strong radiation in the beginning. The worst part of it would be in the first 3 days, and this is based on a case where scientists had observed in another galaxy the core becoming active. At first they thought it was a gamma ray burst, but then it kept going. And it turned out the first 3 days were the most intense. It was like 30 times more intense in the first 3 days. So if you can generalize that, I would say for an event here, stay indoors at least for the first 3 days and don't go out if you realize that the core is exploding. And if it's a cloudless sky and you look towards the constellation of Scorpius and Sagittarius, if you see a bright star there that wasn't there before, that's that the core has gotten active.
I wonder how I can get one of these places on the moon. That that's expensive to get up in there, man. To get one of these places, because if this thing's coming, you
got to be part of the breakaway civilization. The people probably thieving from all of us, honeybees on the planet, right?
Well, Cliff High talks a lot about that. We've had Cliff High on the show multiple times. He talks about this idea of a breakaway civilization that,
Have you heard of Alternative 3? It was a program on BBC, and they wrote a book about it.
Yeah.
Which was presented as fact that there were people, but it was like fairly intelligent professors, so on, disappearing, and nobody knew where they went. And it's possible, they were recruiting people. They had to erase, once they were in the program, they weren't allowed to communicate back what they were doing. So,
what about intelligent life elsewhere in the galaxy? I think we need to get into that. Do you? I mean, it's naive to say that there can't be intelligent life elsewhere in the universe. It's difficult to tie that into the technological advances that we have here. Some people would say that was planted here. The seed of knowledge was planted by intelligent life, maybe millions and millions of years ago. Dr. Courtney Brown talks about Atlantis 70,000 years ago. We had technology, according to him, computers and these sort of things in the past. You wonder, are a lot of these things, does it have to do with, do you believe, that it was brought to us from somewhere else, another planet?
Well, if we had this technology we have today, back then, even back then, we could have colonized other star systems. Because you can travel, actually, I believe, superluminally with this technology. In my book, I explain how it can be done. With what we've got right now, we can build a spacecraft to go faster than the speed of light. And so when you can, and that's with
put a person in a craft
with a crew aboard, yeah, and you can use some of these over unity generators, which the media often doesn't cover, but now and then you on the internet, especially, you will find talk about these. So you don't need any large fuel supply. You're just generating energy. You're tapping into the prime mover of the universe, basically, to run these. And so based on what we know, what we can reverse engineer about what's been trying to be kept secret, and from what we know about stuff that evaded the secrecy, you can put together this, you realize that it's possible to have these craft, to build these craft. It's not energy or time is not a problem. You can get to other stars in reasonable times with small amounts of energy. And so if that's the case, you could say maybe we've been visited here by other civilizations using such technologies. And in my other book, called Decoding the Message of the Pulsars, I show that what astronomers have thought were natural objects, pulsars, are really beacons. And they're, I believe, navigation beacons used for interstellar travel.
Wow.
First of all, they make ideal beacons. In fact, Carl Sagan, when he designed the space plaque on Pioneer 10, it was sending out a message to other civilization who might intercept it, had used 14 pulsars as a way to triangulate our position, just like a GPS system. So it's an ideal galactic GPS system. But what gives it away that they're artificial is that whoever Galactic Federation has produced these beacons, there are certain of these that have marked certain specific sites in the galaxy and made certain geometrical relations, and you come to the conclusion that they're conveying a message to us. And in the book, these
spots out there.
Right. In the book, I decode the message. The message has to do with the galactic core explosion phenomenon, which is the one natural phenomenon in the galaxy that affects all civilizations. So it'd be a natural topic for them to talk about, especially when our safety is concerned. So they're trying to, in a way, warn us about it, in case we haven't already discovered it.
Dr. Paul Laviolette on the Black Tower Show. Now I'm going to ask some common man questions. It is a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm sure you get this a lot. But if I'm traveling faster than the speed of light, how do I maintain my body? How does my body stay together if I'm traveling that fast?
Well, like I said, the framework in which I understand these technologies is ether theory that I developed called subquantum kinetics, which I began developing back in, I guess, the first ideas came in '73. But with this idea, let's say you use something like Eugene Podkletnov's gravity impulse beam, Russian scientist. He is able to beam gravity waves, and he can knock over books 2 kilometers away from the beam generator. And it seems to be confined to the beam. Now, if you get a whole array of these pushing on your craft, you can propel it. Now, he's found that his beam gravity waves go faster than the speed of light. And he's measured, in his high-powered beams, he's measured to speeds over 3,000 times the speed of light. Now, I believe that these beams actually propel slugs of ether along their. It's like a column, and imagine it. Every time it pulses, it sends a puff of ether out with it, which is going superluminally, or at least luminally initially. So if your craft, in effect, is riding on a slug of ether, it's as if you're stationary, like you're not experiencing any of the normal speed of light effects. So they talk about time dilation and length contraction and stuff that you might think, geez, I could get ripped apart, if I'm going close to the speed of light.
Sure.
But it would require proper engineering. I mean, it's not something you would just design lightly and get aboard. You want to test out with unmanned flights and with all sort of instruments to make sure you got it right. But I believe it can be done so that people can travel superluminally. The thing that's holding us back are all the concepts that are outmoded that they keep teaching. That nothing can go faster than the speed of light.
Right.
I was at a conference in Kos, Greece. It's an island in Greece, where it was a scientific conference held, and these fellows from Cologne, Germany, came and demonstrated their device. They're professors. This stuff is known. It was published, their early results were published in Nature magazine, which is a prominent scientific journal. They were sending microwaves through a 50-meter coil of copper tubing so fast they couldn't. The time difference between the pulse leaving and being received was beyond what they could resolve with their oscilloscope. So it was hundreds of times, even more, faster than the speed of light. And so this is unclassified. It's stuff that's going on. Just people. It's not stuff that is talked about in the media, and none of the professors in the physics departments in universities talk about it that I know of. But it completely demolishes standard physics. Just that one example. And I've seen right here in New York State, we have a guy, Oblansky, who's did experiments. I worked with him, and we sent shock waves across his laboratory beginning at like 8 times the speed of light, and they would slow down as they get to the other side. But on the whole, they were going much faster than the speed of light, and that was those were reproducible. I mean, he could show that to anybody if he had the time to set up. He did have some physicists come, and they just wouldn't believe, when they saw it right in front of their eyes. They saw the results. and they still couldn't believe it. And that's the strength of ideas. They just, will distort what you're observing.
That brings me to the feeling tone, because you talk about psychology, how people learn. And just hearing you talk makes me think about how important it is how we're learning and how we understand how we learn. And you talk about the robot model, this kind of like almost like mechanistic way of how we get information, how we're taught, how we learn. And yet, I think like what you said, that's important. The key to us kind of drawing out these technologies, and how we move forward into the future has everything to do with how we're learning. And you talk. Yeah,
well, the robot model is the standard view. That the mind works like a computer, like that thoughts are hardwired to particular nerves in your brain, and all the neurophysiology research that's been emerging seems to rule that out. The theory I worked on with a psychiatrist, Bill Gray, generally called feeling tone theory, and Gray's original name for it was emotional cognitive structure theory, was that thoughts are based in feelings, and sort of like feeling tones, as he called them, and they're basically agglomerations or combinations of different feeling tones. So they code experience. And my contribution was I showed how these can become amplified into thoughts and stored in the brain. So with this model, it has new implications for education. Understanding something new is the wrong way to do it is to program the students as if they're computers, because your brain does have the capability to memorize, but it does not. You can't speed the understanding process. Understanding requires time. It means the person has to spend time integrating the new material into his own feeling tone framework that he's evolving. And so this new model, shows that learning is more like an agrarian process, just like you grow crops. It has a certain of its own time. You can't push it, and if you do push it, you get what I call mental abortions, where people understand facts without. Well, they have facts, they can spin them back, but they don't know how to go beyond that to use them.
How true, I mean, it's going through the educational system. I definitely felt that was that part that was happening to me. The idea that the information is out here and we're going to shoot it into you. We're going to take this information and just program it into your way of thinking, and that's what learning is.
And there were a lot of educators out there who are thinking along the similar terms that education needs to be more paced, and feelings are more important. Like you want to encourage a feeling of safety in the classroom from ridicule, because as soon as somebody's ridiculed, that sort of squashes this creative process of understanding. In fact, of all my work, that's the most accepted in the conventional realm now. Like it's been cited in doctoral dissertations and magazine articles, so on. Although I haven't really done much recently in that. That was work I did back 79, 80.
Yeah. I teach music I work with people with disabilities, and we have the classroom that I try to create is it's all about having a specific project that people can rally around. I wonder sometimes how kids would react to having experiments more in the classroom, like working on very specific sorts of tasks. Even sometimes difficult, challenging scientific experiments for young kids to get into. I wonder if I'm just kind of talking off the top of my head, but having specific experiment that everybody can rally around. It just seems to work in my
yeah, it makes the learning experience less cognitive, and you're moving your hands and grabbing things, and that's one way to learn is through kinesthetic learning. You integrate your actual movements, grabbing the test tube or whatever, with the concepts.
Dr. Paul Laviolette, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. We're going to get a few places on the moon. Me and you, we're going to be having a place. We don't have to mow the grass there, that makes life a little bit easier there. But the thing is, this is real, folks. You need to go to etheric.com. That's ETHERIC. And just check out what Dr. Paul Laviolette, what he is doing, what he's devoted his life to doing, opening people's minds, changing. You've influenced so many. Do you understand how many people you have influenced, Dr. Paul Laviolette, on this planet, moving forward? You are such a huge key in the awakening of our species, and I thank you very much for that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
And we'd love to have you back on again, and you take care.
Okay.